Josh, do we want to go around and do introductions while we wait for Michelle?
Sure. Do we need to officially launch this meeting first?
We can. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March 6th Hanford Advisory Board Community Outreach and Engagement Committee meeting. My name is Lindsay Summers, and I am the DDFO for the Hanford site. I'd like to identify just a few reminders before we get started. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the requirements of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and each member has a joint responsibility for assuring that the operating ground rules are observed and that discussions are conducted in a respectful manner. I appreciate your attendance today, and I look forward to the meeting. Josh?
Thank you. Thank you for the ground rules review. For those that haven't, we have a sign-in sheet here in the room that is separate from ecology sign-in sheet. Please make sure you've signed in on both. And on the note, when you're leaving, please sign out on the one at the desk and leave your badges. They're very valuable. As a notice, these meetings are recorded and will be posted on the Hanford site YouTube channel. Our chair has not arrived yet, but I believe we can start introductions. If you'd like to start going around the room, we'll go clockwise.
Laura Caulfield, attendance.
Lindsay Summers, Department of Energy.
Anna Cowley, HMIS.
Marianne Waneke, HMIS.
Mia Burke, Hanford Challenge.
Larry Brand, Community at Large.
Jim Conga, Herbert M. Parker Foundation at WSU.
Josh Patton, App Facilitation Team.
Judy Talbot, Facilitation Team.
Jennifer Presby, League of Women Voters.
Susan Coleman, Public at Large.
Ryan Miller, Department of Ecology.
And online, I'll go down the list as I see them. Please be ready to open your microphones, starting with Brian. Thank you. Dan.
Good morning, Dan Solis, member of the public.
Patrick.
Patrick Conrad, HMIS.
David Enan.
Dave Enan with EPA.
Earl.
Good morning, Earl Fordham, Washington State Department of Health, Office of Radiation Protection.
Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Hendrickson, Oregon Department of Energy, though I'm joining this meeting as a member of the public.
Liz.
Liz Matson with Hanford Challenge. Good morning, everyone.
And Matthew.
Matthew Campbell, Confederated Tribe C, Matilla.
Anagrisa Alvarez.
Yes,
Sorry.
good morning. Ana Grisel Alvarez with Department of Ecology.
All right, and just joining us in the room. We're doing introductions, so.
Oh, perfect. I'm Michelle Holt. I'm the Executive Director for the Benton Franklin Council of Governments and co-chair, vice chair for the committee.
And Rob Davis will be joining us momentarily.
So as a recap, we opened the meeting, done some administrative reviews, and we're about to go over the agenda.
Perfect. How about I grab a copy of the agenda? Apologies, everybody.
We're glad you're here safely.
Thank you. So glad I made it.
And we'll have you sign in later.
Great. So apologies for being a little unprepared. It's been that kind of a morning, everybody.
Well, you're here now, that's friends, and it's gonna get better.
Perfect. I'm actually really excited for today's agenda. So we'll start with updates from our public involvement activities. We'll move on to Healthy Environment for All, or the HEAL Act presentation from the Department of Ecology. And then for committee business, we have topics for committee leadership elections, updating on our action items, and requests for topics for our next meeting.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say before we begin our first agenda item?
I don't have anything before we get started.
All right. As soon as everyone takes their seats, I think we can begin our public involvement activity update.
Ryan, you just accidentally muted the room.
Okay, all right. Can everyone who's joining us virtually hear me? We had a little, wonderful. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. So as we scroll down here, we have several things to share. Of course, all of these items are on the Hanford.gov external website. Just go to public involvement opportunities and we have everything listed there. As we start on the top left corner, we have the Washington State Department of Ecology comment periods, and I'll let Ryan speak about those here shortly. We have one of our biggest events of the year tonight at 5:30 in the Richland Library. We have the public comment period and public meeting on Hanford cleanup priorities. Of course, we look forward to HAB's advice on this. This is one of your most important pieces of advice that the agencies take so seriously, and we appreciate all of your hard work on that. So we look forward to you joining us. And because I'll be making some preparations for that once we're done with this section, I'll be leaving. Normally I stay through the rest of these meetings, but I'll try to hop on and listen. So please accept my apology up front because I do enjoy being here with you in these meetings. You can see the other HAB items listed here on the right, along with the meeting tonight. And then recently completed the HAB meetings, and of course we wrapped up in the fall the 5-year plan. If we scroll down a little bit further, we have class 1 modifications that are public notices that go out quarterly. We have those 2 posted, and we'll have another one coming out here in the spring very soon. And then you can see the other more unusual things here. We've had a couple of things involving ERDF and disposal out there. One's annual, one was special permitting to build new Supercell 11, and then many things on the right that involve all of the TPA contractors. And so we, contractors and agencies, of course. And so really, we just have a great deal coming up. And then Ryan Miller has several things coming up involving TBI and more to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dana. So for the ecology side, there's nothing on the website yet since it's not out yet, but you can scroll down there, Josh. So we include Energy's and EPA's comment periods on our website. So upcoming, starting on Monday the 11th, the test bed initiative, or ecology is holding a public comment period on our research, development, and demonstration permit for the 2009 test bed initiative demonstration. So that's going to be a 45-day comment period starting on March 11th and going through April 25th, whatever 45 days is. And then we're going to have a public meeting at the Richland Public Library at 5:30 p.m. on March 20th. That's going to be a hybrid public meeting. And at that meeting, Ecology will do a presentation on the permit, and then Energy will do a presentation as well on the demonstration. The only other really notable upcoming PI was on NewCon, which was that another research development demonstration permit involving the air vapors from the tanks. That was going to be late spring. That's been pushed back, I think, into June now, I believe, is the rough time frame for that. So still happening soon. Just got delayed just a little bit. And then the other update I had was the tri-party agreement public involvement survey that we sent out this year from January through about February 16th. That closed. We're working on the getting all the results together and writing up the summary report of that. And then I would love to come and present that to the HAB like I did the 2022 one. We're aiming to get that published sooner than we did last year. We published it in July last year. We're aiming to get that done a lot sooner. But I think what I can say, just right off the bat, is last year we had 87 responses to the survey, and this year we had 225.
Wow, good.
So a really nice boost, and we'll go into more about the different outreach and stuff that happened and the results when we have the results in the survey published. But just wanted to share that just to close the circle on that one. And I think that's kind of all the neatest stuff we have going on over at Ecology. EPA, Dave, you guys got anything you want to talk about?
Nope, not right now, thanks.
Are there any questions?
So the survey results, you said you're gonna try to get them out earlier than July. How much of a stretch would it be to have them brief ready for May full board?
Potentially, if not May, I'd love to come and share it at the June committee meeting. Ideally, so potentially, but I think June might be safer.
No questions, but Ryan, congratulations on that many survey responses. I know as an entity who sends out surveys pretty regularly, that's a great return.
Surveys are hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's surveyed out. So.
All right, so.
No comments
Right.
on chat online, so.
With no more questions, is there anything that needs to be said to conclude this item?
Thank you,
We
Dana.
appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dana. Sounds good.
So.
Thanks, everyone.
Meeting into that. So, our next agenda item is scheduled for 9:45.
Yeah, so for the presentation, she's not able to hop on until 9:45, so we should probably, Michelle, we maybe can hop to another item and maybe just.
Want to do the committee business?
Yeah, probably.
I think that's probably fine. Okay, so committee leadership elections. Apologies for, because I was not part of our ESC meeting the other day. My understanding is that as a committee, we need to determine when we would like to have our committee leadership elections, whether we want to do that now, looking forward to when we would normally transition in August, or a week to do that until after the start of the October New Year. Is that correct?
What we ended up on was that each of the committees make their own decisions. The first key piece is to change the start date, the term start and end date for all committee leadership to be 1 October to 30 September. So that would change the terms for vice and chair of the committees to link up with the membership packet term dates. So it kind of cleans up that issue. That also will give us, as Kelly Snyder suggested, it'll give us some grace. So we can the committees can decide when between now and 1 October they want to hold their elections. If they want to hold them now, they can hold them now. And then the individuals do not take custody of those positions until 1 October. So that kind of gives us that grace period because the letters state that an alternate cannot serve in the letters and everything else says the alternates cannot serve in a leadership position. Okay. Yes, Judy.
So for this year, existing leadership positions will extend until October 1st. And then in regards to when to hold the elections, it was noted that if elections were held earlier, like at this meeting or before June, then the newly elected individuals would be able to participate in the leadership workshop in June. So yesterday there were elections, and for Liz, the chair and vice chair were unopposed, and Rebecca Holland continues as the chair. Vice chair for the CARMS committee, Tom Cecilia will continue, it was unopposed, to continue serving as the chair, and there will be an email going out requesting self-nominations and candidates for the vice chair position. So it is to this board, this committee today, to determine whether you'd like to hold elections today, later, how would you like to proceed? So that's the background.
So, and just the current situation we have with existing leadership for this committee, of course, Tracy is an alternate, so the chair of the committee would have to be open to new nomination regardless of when we hold those elections. And as the vice chair, I'll just go on record right now and say that I am not in a position to invest the time to serve as committee chair, although I would be happy to continue as a vice chair if that were desired. So either way, we absolutely are going to have to seek some nomination process for a new chair. So given that, our next next committee meeting, would we have a committee meeting in June, or does the committee leadership leadership workshop kind of take place of committee meetings in that month? I'm not familiar.
Lindsay, I'd like to provide some context here.
Perfect.
Okay, so as far as Tracy goes, it's my understanding that Tracy will be rolling off the board at the end of this cycle anyways, and so that would be, we would still need to provide a replacement chair for this subcommittee. Now, as far as where it shares that the alternates may not serve in leadership roles, that isn't outlined in the appointment letters. However, it is outlined in the EMSSAB policies and procedures document. As far as committee meetings for June, there are placeholders for subcommittee meetings for all 4 committees. In addition to the leadership workshop, there may be a shift in some dates. As far as the leadership workshop, we may be moving that to Monday, we may be moving it to Tuesday to accommodate for some folks' schedules. So, but yes, so the group can choose to vote today on a subcommittee chair or vice chair, or you guys can punt it to the next meeting.
Or open nomination.
Well, what we did in CARM, because we didn't have any nominations for vice, is we had facilitation send out an email to everyone on the committee who was eligible to serve, so they could self-nominate before the next meeting.
Maybe a suggestion would be, because really everybody in the entire board is a member of this committee. It may be that we should ask for nominations at the next board meeting, involving everyone, and let everybody know it's all of our responsibilities to pay attention to this organization, to this subcommittee, and participate when they can. But it might be you get a lot more people here to consider self-nominating or discussing it. And I don't know, just a suggestion.
And I think that it's one of those things where they're not necessarily on the committee by default. It's something that they can select in addition to their 2 committee choices. So, but whatever works best for the group, I think is a great path forward.
Given that point, and I agree, unless there are folks who feel strongly on the call, I'd love to hear, but my inclination would be to ask for self-nominations and hold off on elections at least until the next committee meeting, if not the full board meeting. Any thoughts?
Well, you voiced your interest in being willing to serve as vice chair. So it might be worth doing what CARM did and having split elections if that would be of interest. So we have some certainty moving forward.
I mean, don't get me wrong, if someone has a burning desire to be a vice chair,
So the question would be, is there anyone interested in serving as the vice chair who would like to self-nominate right now? Out on the phone or in person?
don't everybody put your hand up at once.
Also note that we don't necessarily have to decide this right this minute. We could think about it over break, or I guess we don't have a break. We could think about it through the next presentation and decide when we can actually reach that point in time on the agenda.
So perhaps we could put out the invitation to those who are on the call that as you ponder that interest, whether it was vice chair or chair, or you have any specific thoughts on timing, please share those in the chat while we transition to our presenter in a few minutes, and then we can circle back after the presentation.
And it's open to anyone who's going to be a primary member in next October's packet and isn't already elected as a leadership position on the board.
Perfect. Okay.
So I do see our presenter has joined us. Would you like to give some background about what we're talking about, Ryan?
Yeah. So before Courtney does her presentation, and welcome, Courtney. I'll introduce you in just a second. So as for background, at the last committee meeting in January, I raised to the board the potential advice that we'd like you to pursue that was in the work plan involving environmental justice. And specifically, the idea I had was, and Courtney will go into this today, is part of the HEAL Act requires a community engagement plan by each agency. And so Ecology is developing its community engagement plan. And once the agency-wide community engagement plan is finished, I'm going to be taking it, my team is going to be taking it and kind of making a nuclear waste version, so to speak. And that would be what we would seek at board advice on, would be the nuclear waste kind of version of it. So as I provide some of that background, there's interest on just getting some background on the HEAL Act and environmental justice from the state, just to start getting the ball rolling for the committee on getting just the background knowledge and stuff that you guys might need as we get closer to potentially you guys pursuing that advice. Do you think I missed anything, Michelle?
I don't think so. That sounds great.
All right. Well, with that, Courtney, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you. Courtney is with our Office of Equity and EJ. Here to do our presentation today.
Awesome. Thanks for the setup. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Head nods. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I work, as Ryan was saying, I work in the Office of Equity and Environmental Justice at Ecology, and I work on a number of different HEAL Act or environmental justice related policy, law, federal law type of things. And so my job is really to figure out how these things trickle down and actually impact like our work and what we do as an agency in terms of environmental regulations, cleanups, et cetera. So I will talk a little bit about the HEAL Act. I'll kind of set up like why it happened, what it intends to do. It would be great if it did a lot of different types of things, but it's really a narrow scope of work. So just giving you a sort of overview, I'll give you an overview of the HEAL Act, our progress to date on our sort of implementation of this so far, and then things people can look forward to that are coming downstream that might be helpful, might be tools, might be supportive, but really ultimately like help us with compliance with the laws that are new and important and kind of fun. So what is the HEAL Act? The HEAL Act was passed in 2021.
Courtney, if you could give me just a second to bring it up on the screen.
Yeah, Courtney, were you going to share your slides or do you want us to share it? Sorry.
I'm prepared to share it. I can share
Here
it.
I was thinking I had shared my slides.
And those of you in the room, I think you
it's not even a Monday.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. So just again, overview, progress to date, and then looking forward. So what is the HEAL Act? The HEAL Act was passed in 2021, but it has a number of like legislative requirements that are kind of like still rolling out. Not everything came out at the same time. So I'll tell you some of the things that we were obligated to do already and some things that are forthcoming. But the law instructs agencies to consider and plan for and to like actually address environmental justice in our work. And so what do we mean by environmental justice? We can be talking about a lot of different things, but the law has a very specific scope that it instructs us to think about. So specifically, the law asks us to think about health disparities. And that's why we bring in folks like the DOH and all of these different agencies to work together. And when we're thinking about health disparities, we're thinking about how people have been disproportionately exposed to environmental harms over time. And I think that that's not a new idea for Hanford. We're thinking about not just cumulative environmental effects, but really intense environmental effects that people are experiencing. and how this disproportionately impacts communities of color, low-income communities, tribes, and also indigenous communities that all live near and happen to be in these areas. And that's not an accident. And so when we're thinking about environmental harms, there's historic things that we could think about that are pretty classic, things like living next to a landfill, living next to nuclear waste, but also things like climate change is an environmental harm that we're thinking about and preparing for. And also something that we think about with environmental justice is not just the harm, but the lack of benefits that people get to experience. So things like clean air, clean water, actual access to, important culturally significant species. It's not just like a harm, it is also a loss. And so there are ways that we're thinking about environmental justice that are sort of multifaceted. And the outcomes of these harms aren't just the environmental pieces. It impacts people's lives. It impacts how they live in their bodies. It impacts their access to healthy, nutritious foods. It impacts their ability to thrive. It also leads to things like greater risks of cancer, heart disease, asthma. And so when we're thinking about disproportionate exposure, there are a number of ways that we can sort of analyze this. Some are about thinking about like community experiences or lived experience. And one way that we think about this, it's definitely not the only way, is thinking about the cumulative burdens or the disproportionate burdens. And so for folks that have access to their computers, I put a link in the chat to this tool that we sometimes use in our office, the Washington's Environmental Health Disparities Map, where you can see the things that impact communities or disproportionately impact certain communities. And you can see that the darker the color on this map, that means communities are more likely to experience adverse harms or environmental harms in some capacity. And so the darker the color, the more harms a community experiences. And it's not something that necessarily happens on a gradient. You could see neighbors right next to each other. They might be ranked 1 next to their neighbor that's ranked 10. And this is significant for a number of reasons. One is that this is broken down. If you actually look at the population information, it tends to disproportionately impact communities of colors pretty significantly. And it impacts things like people's life expectancy. Like I was saying, there are a number of downstream effects of being exposed to these environmental harms over time. And so I have this chart here from the Department of Health. These are older stats about the average life expectancy. And if you are in a rank 1 versus a rank 10 community, on average, it's around a 6-year difference in terms of lifespan. But in some communities, when it's not averaged, it could be as much as 13. And so some community members have talked about what it feels like that they won't get to see their grandchildren grow up just because of where they live. But if they lived about a mile down the road, they would have a radically different experience. And so these are the sort of lived realities of being exposed to these environmental harms over time, and how we're now instructed as a state to try to figure out what to do about this. How do we address this in our work? And so we're instructed to be creative in some capacity, but for the most part, there's a couple of buckets of things that we're required to do. And by we, I mean there are a lot of people that we're working with. So agencies that are required to uphold the HEAL Act or to try to figure out how to implement the HEAL Act. This screen is really intense. There's a lot of players here. There's the Department of Ecology, Transportation, Commerce, Puget Sound Partnership, Department of Health, DNR, Agriculture, and we all are working together to try to solve some of these puzzles, because so many of this work or so many of these issues really span our individual jurisdictions. It's not just a health issue, it's a health and environment and food, or if you draw the lines around our agencies, you can really start to see how these are complex problems. And so the HEAL Act is really historic in that it's really encouraging us to work together in a way that we've tried before, but now we have to, which is really great. We're supportive in that. And I have this slide here, not because I expect anyone to memorize this chart, but just to show you how complicated it is, the way that we're working together. There's the interagency work group that includes all of those agencies. We're working with the governor's office. We're working with the Commissioner of Public Lands. We're working with EJ Council, which is a new body that was stood up when the HEAL Act was stood up. And so there's a lot of folks that are trying to solve these issues collectively. And it's a big, complicated puzzle. But ultimately, there are 5 buckets of things that we're working to solve. And the first one is the one that was mentioned at the start, and it's adopt community engagement and tribal consultation frameworks. And the idea is that we're building relationships and we're trying to figure out how to stop making the same mistakes or empowering us to have the resources that we need to actually build the relationships, build the trust, and also like work on our translations, work on our access, work on so many different pieces that will really help our agencies to address the environmental justice issues that we know are happening. And so that's something that's really exciting that's been coming out of a lot of this work here is the community engagement and the tribal consultation plans. We developed an early draft of this, but the new one is forthcoming and it'll be out in 2025. And the hope is that it's going to inform not just our agency at Ecology, but it's going to inform the Department of Health. It's going to inform the Department of Transportation. And the idea is that we're having some similar processes. Like it's not fair for the public to have to understand 1,000 different ways the state does something. The idea is that the state will be more transparent. We're doing our best to like get our ducks in a row so that people can engage with us better. And so this is something that is exciting, but it's also, it's a challenge. All of our agencies have different charges. We all have different scopes. And so getting everyone on board, it's been really interesting. The other thing that we're required to do for the HEAL Act is to plan how we're going to address environmental justice. Put it in our agency plans, put it in our program level plans, put it in our like project plans, and really make sure that it's not an afterthought. So often there's like a EJ sticker that gets slapped onto the end of a project. And we know that like when we're there, the cake is already baked and it's so hard to really think about like meaningfully adjusting course. And so the idea is that we're thinking about these things early so that we're not stuck at the end with no money, no funds, and it's not something that we could really do in good faith. The third thing that we're working on is incorporating environmental justice into our budget and funding decisions. So there are a lot of laws that are instructing this, Justice 40, the IRA, there's like I'm mentioning federal laws. We also have now, like because of HEAL, have a state requirement of making sure that 40% of our grants and loans, contracts, expenditures, they all go to overburdened communities. And so these are new requirements for us. It requires us to think about like, how are we writing our grant applications? How are we writing or engaging with people to get them to like actually apply for things, engage with us, be aware of different types of benefits that we provide as an agency. And so this is another thing that we're hoping will really like shift in terms of providing benefits to communities that need them the most. Another thing that we're thinking about are the EJ assessments. So EJ assessments are essentially a process where you look at a project from the beginning and you say, what are going to be the EJ impacts of this? And there's an engagement component, there's an analysis component. We're required to invite tribal consultation, which I think is really exciting to think about all these different ways that people are going to be able to inform our work. But for now, it's pretty limited. So we're only required to do EJ assessments for 4 types of things: rulemaking, new grant and loan programs, really expensive projects, and then if the agency wants to change any laws. And so an EJ assessment is an exciting idea, but we're not doing it for everything. We're really only doing it for a small scope of things right now. But over time, the idea is that we're going to expand and start to think about what else can we analyze with an EJ assessment. And then finally, the last thing that we're thinking about are developing environmental justice metrics. And this is something that is forthcoming. These first 4 pieces have all sort of like, we've started a lot of them, we're piloting a lot of this, we're starting to do engagement, we're starting to invite tribal consultation. We've gone to AT&I about this, and we're trying to like make sure that this is informed as possible by people that are impacted by it. But the first forthcoming one, this one here, is a dashboard that's going to be stood up September 1st. And it's going to track our progress on these first 4 items. And so we're going to be tracking, like, where is our money actually going? And the idea is not that we're going to hit 40% first out the gate, for instance, for the budget equity piece, but where are we? Like, how close are we to hitting these goals? Are we actually kind of close? Are we far? Like, what needs to change in our work to make sure that we're getting close to this? So we're developing metrics and tracking really just to start with like understanding our baseline and understanding our foundation and seeing like now that we have these processes, like maybe it'll change things over time. And so I wanted to show you an example of one of the things that we're developing that I think we're kind of excited about. So we have this map at Ecology where we track all of our grants and loans. And this is really just by geolocation. And if you click on any one of these dots, it'll show you a polygon of an area. And it'll tell you, where did we give out a grant? And then if you click on any one of those pieces, you can learn a little bit more. You can click, you can zoom in, you can learn about the project. But something that we're hoping to do is overlay this with a map of overburdened communities in Washington and really show, like, this is where money is going in overburdened communities. These are the types of projects we're funding in overburdened communities. This is where we think an overburdened community is. And this also intersects with tribal land layers. Tribal lands are counted as an overburdened community. And so is money going to tribal lands? And there's going to be a separate evaluation for it. Is money going to tribes? And what's interesting about this dashboard is when we were standing it up, we thought it was just going to be a HEAL Act dashboard, but it's also going to be in part a Climate Commitment Act dashboard. And so there's a lot of sort of like us trying to streamline, like we're talking about. There's just 1,000 maps that exist, 1,000 websites, but that's not very helpful to the public. And so the idea is we'll have a centralized place where we're tracking a lot of this different types of work. And like I was saying, like this can be like really complex polygons. There might be areas where like it's a literal street because we're also tracking with the Department of Transportation. It might be a whole waterway. Someone might do a polygon of the Columbia River. And so there's ways that we're trying to figure out how to represent, like, this is the work we are doing and this is how we're communicating about it. So this is what we've been working on, and this is what the HEAL Act requires. It's not necessarily like a be-all, end-all of environmental justice. It was a historic victory, and it's really exciting that it was passed because it was a really community-led initiative, and I think that that's a really fun way of thinking about like laws being passed. It's impactful. I think that seeing money going to overburdened communities will be really important. And I think that community engagement and changing how we engage with people is going to be really significant. But it's not like a perfect solution. This won't solve all of the things that have ever happened. And I think it's important to be aware of the limitations of a law like this. And all of that to be said, we're still working on other legal requirements. We're working with our partners on the our performance partnership agreement with the EPA. We're working on civil rights. We're working on our Justice 40 requirements. There are so many things our office is trying to track, but the HEAL Act is the one that is really like driving the most change right now for us because there are legislative due dates. It's really a hot button issue. There's a lot of eyes on our agency because of it. And I think that it has a lot of promise to change things for us as an agency. So I was a fire hose of information. There's a lot here and a lot to chew on, but I'm happy to just like have a conversation. I hope that you all have like the slides available to you, but if there's things that are coming up for you that you have any questions about, I'm really happy to like talk through any of it. And I have my email address up here as well for folks if they ever have questions about the HEAL Act or questions about environmental justice work at Ecology. I'm happy to be a resource.
Awesome, thank you, Courtney. And I just wanted to add on a quick comment after her presentation. So I handed out an environmental justice 2-pager that we put together for Hanford. That's more of just supplemental material today. We're not going to present on that specifically since she had a really great presentation. And then we're going to go over to agency perspective next for DOE and EPA. But I just wanted to share from the more specific Hanford side of things. We're continuing to work with EPA and DOE on, we each have separate environmental justice initiatives, and so we're really looking to continue to collaborate with each other and build on one another, and just recognize that environmental justice is bigger than any one of us, particularly at Hanford. And one thing that we've been tracking too is there was an environmental justice pilot project down in Los Alamos that that we've just been keeping an eye on that potentially could be of interest over on this end. But with that, I'll see if I'll kick over the facilitation to Michelle, if you guys want to go on to the agency perspective.
We'll start. Does anybody have anything to respect on?
I just want to say thank you to Courtney for her presentation, but I've got nothing to add. Thank you.
And we got Davina for EPA.
No, just really appreciate the presentation. And I guess if I had one request is, if there is time, if you could demonstrate how to use the map you put in the link, that would be, because we obviously have a similar sort of map, and it's like you can draw any number of conclusions for them.
I hope I'm still sharing my screen.
Yeah.
So if I were to, I just choose Tacoma because I think that the gradients can be really helpful to look at, and that happens to be where I am, so I'm biased. But some of the things that you can look at on this map are you can see what different, it's kind of like EJ screen in a way, and it's different than CJust in that there aren't like yes, no disadvantaged communities. It's a little bit more gray. It's a little bit more of a heat map kind of approach to understanding these issues. But essentially you can go in and you can put in any location that you're looking for. And then there's a number of indicators that rely on statewide data. And some of the data actually comes from EJ screen. So some of it is imported, but a lot of it is also statewide managed. And so a lot of it is ecology data. And there's different things that you can look at. There's like 2.5, PM2.5 concentration in the air, lead risk from housing. There's socioeconomic factors. And if I were to choose a census tract, let's say I choose this one, it's ranked 10 for there being like a cumulative score. And that's because they probably rank high on a number of these different indicators here. And something that you can look at are the different sort of like population characteristics, age and sex. You could zoom in a little bit more. And I wish that it was a little bit similar to EJ Screen, and that EJ Screen has that really wonderful community report feature. And I know that there are a number of updates coming to this map in, I think, February of 2025. But there's different things that you can look at here too that aren't necessarily counted as part of the rank 10, but it's relying on a lot of different types of state data that we have different types of information on, things like care facilities, city limits. You can zoom in. This is census tracts right now, but you could zoom in on different ways of looking at it. It could be organized by zip code. It could be organized by county. There's different types of features that you could look at, like if you're close to different dry cleaner locations, different types of hazardous waste sites. There's a tribal lands layer somewhere in here, tribal boundaries, but that's just, it's reservation lands only, I think, right now. And so there's not a lot of, the map could probably be improved to include things like usual and accustomed areas for tribes, and there are a number of indicators that aren't included here. So like water quality would be an important one. But there are some things that you can learn. Curious if this is not loading for me for some reason. There we go. The numbers are here. So you could see if I'm like clicking on a specific census tract, like the reason why it's likely ranked high is because heavy proximity to roadways, environmental exposures, and you could see why it's probably ranked pretty highly. And so I'm sure this font is microscopic, so I'm sorry. But you could kind of see the gradient in color a little bit of like, if it's ranked 10 for certain indicators, that would be why it's sort of like, it's a cumulative score. And then how it ultimately works is that it's a ranking, or it's a relative ranking. So let me zoom out here. I've heard people who are like incredibly well-intentioned say things like, my goal is to get rid of all rank 10 communities. But unfortunately, it's a relative rank. So someone will always be in the top 10% and someone will always be in the bottom 10%. And so it's not necessarily that like you can, that there's like threshold determinations for any of these sort of indicators, but it's relative to sort of like comparing areas, which one has worse pollution. So if you're a rank 10, that's the top 10 worst cumulative burden. And then each sort of number is like 10%, 10%, 10%. Sorry if that is a really scattershot way of explaining the map, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to walk through it.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
I have a question. Is this live and available for the public to use right now if we include this link in the notes? Okay, thank you.
I really appreciate being kind of how it's used and what you can and can't interpret. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate the perspectives. Does the committee have any questions or thoughts to share with Courtney? Tom?
Yeah, I was really appreciate the presentation, and I was wondering if you could also share the grant map with the facilitation team so they can put that in the notes too, because that also seems really like a fun tool to use.
Yeah, I will not make you look at me search for it quickly, so I'll put the link in the chat in just a minute.
Thank you.
So what does the implementation look like for this Office of Ecology? Like what Brian, you mentioned you wanted some advice or some kind of board product, whether that's a sounding board maybe. What are we looking at? You mentioned 2025. Is that when everyone has to have their plans in?
Yeah, so 2025, the first map that I showed you, 2025, it's going to be updated, and it's going to be updated based on tribal consultation, community engagement, and a number of other indicators that are being added. We're able to find more statewide data, which is helping us really like refine. I mentioned that there's a lot of things that aren't included, and I think that the map team is doing their best to try to add as much as we can to get like a clearer picture of the problems. This is the map that you mentioned that I brought up that's going to inspire the dashboard. And so I don't know if folks have ever seen, California has something called Cal Enviro Screen, but it's like a really big dashboard where they track all of their environmental stuff, their climate stuff. And we're making something like it in Washington. And that's the thing that's going to be stood up and available on September 1st. And it's going to have information about like, where are the overburdened communities in Washington? How much money do they get? What are some of the issues that communities are facing? And I think that the idea is really to have this be a place where communities can learn about what's happening in their neighborhoods. And I think that was part of the goal in creating a map like this. Right now, this is just for ecology, but we are hoping it'll be all of the agencies that are covered under HEAL and the Climate Commitment Act, which is like 30 plus agencies. And so that way people can like look over, click on a dot and say, hey, that's my neighborhood. What got money here? Why is my community getting money? And what are we getting money for? And people can learn about and connect with organizations in their communities as well. And so this is sort of the inspiration is we've been doing this at Ecology for some time, and we're hoping to sort of expand out so that people outside of the agency can start to work with us on this. And then,
sorry, Courtney, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then the other thing for 2025 is the community engagement plan. And so that will be hopefully finalized version 1. And I think that it's been taking some time because we're working a lot with community partners on it. And we're working at the speed that people want to work with us on it. And I think that that's how we build relationships, but it also means that we're going slower than we might like. So there's a fine needle to thread here that we're trying to walk a tightrope, and I'm excited for what's to come.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And Tom, specifically to the nuclear waste question, what I was interested in was potential, feedback or advice would be great on the community engagement plan, the piece, because once the agency-wide one's done, we'll take it and tweak it for nuclear waste, and that's what I was really interested in feedback on. And Courtney, you might be able to provide some more detail on this if there's interest, but so we are currently operating under a provisional community engagement plan while the final is being developed, right?
Right. Yeah. The HEAL Act, very well intentioned, but it set a lot of deadlines that were warp speed. They were impossible deadlines that were really short. So we created original version 1 documents of things that are provisional, knowing that like this isn't the final. And so we have a provisional document that we're working off of that we're taking with us to our community partners, and we're asking for feedback and we're asking for advice, and we're trying to improve it. But there's some good juice in there. We've been working with our EJ Council on those pieces. And so our hope is just to improve it over time. And then the idea is that we have this tool that our programs can use and modify and really run with it. And I think that that's the hope, is that there's some sort of skeleton of similarity, but when it's really fleshed out, it suits the purpose. Because we don't want something that's not going to work for everyone.
Thanks. And then more generally, Tom, I think the joint advice request list the TPA agency set out for this fiscal year, and I'm going to hazard a guess and say we'll have something similar in the next fiscal year, is just general environmental justice advice, whether it's communications or some other considerations, because obviously ecology has the HEAL Act, and we've got DOE and EPA have their initiatives. So maybe potentially, this is just throwing in the idea out there, maybe potentially advice looking at the 3 initiatives and how they play together, and some recommendations on how that might work in Hanford. So
do we have to pick one? I use this one.
Courtney, I represent the Benton Franklin Council of Governments, and so we are put in the position of providing technical assistance to local governments in our region. And of course, we engage with programs both at state and federal level who are either looking at the HEAL Act or Justice 40, and that's a beginning to impact analysis of grant applications and planning work that's happening. And so I would say a piece of feedback that I have when you all are looking at community engagement and also the practical application of all of this new data and what does that really mean is how does that trickle down from, say, ecology as the state agency and how you are incorporating those things into your planning and your implementation of, say, funding programs, and then how do we bring that same level of analysis and application down to the local level. So if you have a local government that hasn't yet adopted their own EJ filters in their planning process, or they're applying for funding and that's becoming an area of emphasis as you determine how funds are distributed, there's going to be that lag between funding applications and really telling a story about how an infrastructure project that on its surface may not appear to have an environmental element to it, and yet they're going to have to tell that story to meet these new expectations. And so my feedback would be any planning, education, and just kind of recognizing that sometimes those filters are being applied at the state or federal level, but education about how to respond to that filter hasn't quite filtered down. And so I think there's going to be a gap in local applications for funding that maybe don't score as well as they used to because they aren't including information that they've never had to include before and they're not quite sure how. So that would just be my advice there.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful to name too, especially when we're thinking about like rural areas or areas where like there isn't a huge organization of city government, but maybe like a staff of 5. Like it's unreasonable to ask a staff of 5 to like reinvent all of this on their own. And our hope is really to provide people with, here's how you might answer some of these questions, or here's the tools that we use, but here's an alternative way that like, if you don't fit these, here, provide a narrative. And I think that for our first couple of years, we're asking for a lot of narratives that are hopefully going to help us to understand the issues that people are facing in answering those questions. But you're right that I think that there's going to be a little bit of the way that I see it, it's such a bad metaphor of like gears grinding before they click. And I feel like there's going to be a little bit of grind before these things really like more seamlessly click in.
Yeah. I think we had a specific example recently with commerce where a grant application came out. The application didn't score as well as others. You have a post-mortem with a staff member to say, hey, how can we learn from this application process? And in looking at the scoring information, it's like, well, it could have scored better in your EJ. Well, there weren't any questions that directed a response about EJ. So, you know, how is that being scored? So just as an example, I think we're going to continue to see those things as this rolls out.
That's helpful. It's helpful to hear that that's already happening too, because we work closely with Department of Commerce. And so it's important for us all to be on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Larry, did you have something to share?
Got covered, thank you.
Just a note, if any online participants would like to jump in the conversation, feel free to make a note in chat or raise your hand teams. Is there any other questions or thoughts to share today?
Actually, I do have something. Is there any part of HEAL that is at risk of significant change? For instance, maybe federal courts or something of that sort that may trigger down to the states or local levels, you know, after things are implemented on the state and local levels. Can you speak to that?
It's a really good question. This is something that we're tracking because there's a lot of bills that come out or different laws that come out that, and even Supreme Court decisions that are happening that might have impacts on our ability to analyze by certain indicator. So for instance, there are certain Supreme Court decisions that have come out that are now barring, for instance, the consideration of race in some activities. So far, there's no indication that that's going to impact us. And when we think about an overburdened community, we're thinking about so many different layers of problems that communities are facing that right now we don't see any like legal challenges emerging, but I have no idea what 2024's legislative landscape is going to look like, or sorry, 2025's legislative landscape will look like, especially after the election this year. So definitely paying attention to it. And I think that our concern, right, is like we've done all this work to stand all of these things up only for them to just, for it to have been a waste of time. Like we wasted everyone's time and it didn't do anything and now it's over. And I think we're trying hard to figure out, even if the state or federal laws change, like how do we make sure that we're minimally addressing disproportionate health burdens? Or how do we make sure we're addressing different types of issues? And we're set up with really great plans for considering these things, even if we're no longer instructed to do so on a federal or state level. It's just part of how we do our work. And so I think that the goal is to create really a seamless integration so that it doesn't feel like an extra thing that gets cut, but just part of how we do our business. And so I think that that's an ambitious thing that we're asking for, but that's the goal, is for things to feel seamless, for it to just be part of what we're doing, and for it to not just be like an extra thing that's tacked on that gets cut pretty easily.
So are there any gotchas that you perceive that the Hanford Advisory Board ought to know about as we prepare advice for Ryan?
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but it's something that I think I can pay attention to like in the next cycle and just be in communication with our ecology team and make sure that that's something that comes out as like the second we know about it. But I don't see anything right now. I'm knocking on wood. But again, I have absolutely no idea. I'm really hopeful that that's not going to happen. Washington tends to be pretty stable, but we'll see.
Okay. Thanks for a very nice presentation.
Well, a quick queue check. We have Dan Strong online with a question, and then we'll move to Rob. Dan, please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, Courtney. I love this ensemble of tools here. I was wondering if you could just zoom in on the Hanford area and show us each issues locally, anything that might be salient. And I'm sure some other people might have more specific questions about our local area that you could, just give us a tour. Thanks.
Can you remind me of the zip code, Dan, before I lose you?
9354 would be one of the closest.
93541.
99354.
Thank you. All right, let's get in there. All right, so just looking at I'm going to click on the ones that are highly ranked. And I'll come over here. Oops. So some of the things that pop up are ranking highly for things like sensitive populations. So these are folks that experience death from cardiovascular disease, low birth weight, as well as socioeconomic factors. So it's taking a minute. We've got the loading. So limited English proficiency. I know that there's a large population of both Spanish speakers as well as additional languages. Folks that don't have a high school diploma, folks that are experiencing unemployment. And then if we look at environmental effects, again, it's slow loading, I'm sorry. But things like wastewater discharge are things that people are facing. Lead risk from housing, which is an interesting one. And then I think that some of the things that are interesting about the area are, sorry, let me go back to here, it changed location for me, are thinking about how like some things aren't captured that we know are problems. So again, it's a cool tool. It does some things really, really well, but it's imperfect in that it doesn't capture everything. It doesn't capture a full picture of a community, doesn't capture a full picture of problems. EJ Screen is another tool that's really cool that has a more sort of like robust community report. And I'm not sure if folks have ever used this. Sorry to jump around. But let's say I choose an area here. I think I'm having Wi-Fi problems, so things are loading really slowly for me, but you could see additional sort of indicators here. And then you can also generate a report about the community, and you can get a lot more detailed information, which I think is really helpful. But I'll provide this link in the chat if folks want to explore. Yeah, going back to this map, these are the things you can kind of look at. So things like unemployment being high, poverty being high, people of color, limited English proficiency, etc. I can kind of click around the area of impact too. So like some areas are actually doing fine. And that's like not very far away.
Where you are, for folks in the room, is that white space?
That's
The
Hanford.
Hanford site?
Yeah, Corey, if you raise the map up a little bit real quick, or or go up on it, or instead of zooming in, sorry, yeah, move up, north a little bit.
North, gotcha.
Yeah.
So that white area, is it that there's no data there? It's a federal site?
That's the Hanford site.
There's no population.
Sure.
Yeah. People don't live there.
No. Yeah.
I have a question too.
Let's start with Rob.
So on the previous map of the entire state of Washington.
Yeah.
If you pull that up.
Great.
Yes. You know, that really looks like a, I guess the ones with the octagons on them or whatever. But it is a population density map.
Sometimes, yeah.
Of the state of Washington. You can see the I-5 corridor, you can see I-182 all the way up to Yakima, you can see the Spokane density up at Everett. Yeah. Even Orcas Island is shown here as a higher density than some other areas. So, so anyway, yeah, very similar to a population density map.
It's such a great catch, and this is one of the faults with the with the EHD map, is that it really has an urban bias, and it's because it tends to locate issues as they impact people. But there's a second, I'm sure that no one wants to see all of these different maps, but what we often do is we combine maps together because we know that there's gaps and we know that they are not perfect. And so there's a second map called the Climate and Economic Justice Map that does a way better job of capturing rural issues. And so you could see here different areas kind of light up. Like we get this whole Northeast corridor that wasn't lit up before. And we can see the different types of issues that people might be experiencing. And it would be something like climate change issues, energy issues. But when we choose things like exposure to PM 2.5, like that really happens to be along transportation corridors, or there tends to be biases or clusters of these issues together. So there's a million tools we can look at to kind of analyze these things, and it gets so complicated really fast. But that's to say there's a lot of things that help us understand. None of them are perfect, and they all have pretty significant faults, but they tell us something. And I think that like holding on to what they tell us is still really helpful. Yeah.
My question to you, Courtney, is can you easily tell how up to date any particular datum is?
Such a good question. Yeah, some of the data layers on this are 10 years old. So I wish that it was live, but the EHD map, some of the population data is about 10 years old. And we know that communities change in like a year. They could change in 6 months. They could change based on an event. And so, again, this is not perfect. And it doesn't do a great job of necessarily understanding right now, but it might give us some things to think about. So if we know that it's like a low income area, high population of folks that don't speak English, there's possibly a chance that like we can connect and triangulate with different types of data that will help us understand, like, well, who are these communities? What can we learn about them? What do we know about what languages they do speak? And what other tools can we use to kind of understand these pieces? But there will be an update to this map in 2025, so hopefully it'll be fresh, but it just takes so much time to update these things.
I was just thinking that if you had a way to get even one number, the latest year, anything that's or the earliest year, and you could actually bring up a map and get that number, what year it's up to date to, that might be very helpful in interpreting what you're seeing.
Yeah. I think it'd be helpful in change over time too. I think that seeing like the changes in patterns over time is something that we're hoping to see, but this map was just created 2 years ago. So it's brand new. We don't have like longitudinal data over time yet, but that's the goal. The goal is for us to be able to have those analyses. I think that we haven't really been empowered to do this type of statewide analysis before. So getting everything set up is just using what we've got and then making it better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Judy Talbot, and this is a personal perspective. You know, for legislation that was passed in July of 21, and then to start to institutionalize it, what a heavy lift in less than 3 years. So this is really impressive work. And also the legislation is impressive because it's comprehensive. I mean, it's considering a lot of things. Is it perfect? But no, over adaptive management, you're going to find improvements. And just really, just a lot of accolades for the work that's been done. The fact that you're working with the communities and affected parties and creating the communication and engagement plan. This, I know what a heavy lift this is. And this is a lot. Do not, you know, and you haven't let the perfect get in the way of progress. So a lot of commendations to the state, to the agencies, the legislature. This is a really, you know, comprehensive and thoughtful approach.
Thank you. It's helpful to keep that framework in mind. I feel like we're so open to feedback. All feedback is good. We want to improve this as much as possible. And it's also really helpful to keep in mind how fresh this is and how this is version 1 of what we're hoping will really bloom over time. We're just trying to get the sprouts off the ground. Terrible metaphors, but you know.
Rob? Yeah, so are we expecting, for example, a realtor could use these maps and convince people to buy in certain areas that are less, okay, so that's one thing. And then the other would be, when I present this to my city council, they're gonna ask me the sourcing of some of these attributes.
Yeah.
Are these fully sourced in a document somewhere, or where, you know, because I certainly think there's a couple of very active people on the city council that would say, oh, well, let's improve this.
I think that's our goal, is that we want people to be aware of what's happening around them. They might not even know. Like, we might look outside and say, you know, there's smog, there's things happening. Like, we know that it's not like perfect, but people might not know, like, oh, we're in the top 10% of the state. Like, why is it so bad? And I think that this empowers people to ask those questions of, like, what's actually going on in my neighborhood, in my community. And we have this map at Ecology of what's in my neighborhood that helps us to understand, like, what's been permitted into that area, where are there cleanups? And our goal is to add different pieces of information, like, where are there violations? Where are there penalties? Because if people have a right to know, and I think that there was an interesting law, the Community Right to Know Act, that was passed, that people just have a right to make informed decisions and understand what's going on around them. And one of the concerns that we have that you named is, how does this impact things like housing prices? And how does this impact things like, you know, let's say people are already being harmed and now all of a sudden their homes are worth less money. Like, we're not trying to do that at all. And we're trying to find a way that if we can identify areas that are experiencing these issues, how do we address them? And I think that the goal is for us to have an understanding of like, where is there an issue so that we can prioritize resources, prioritize grants, offer the most support that we possibly can to areas that need the support most. And so I hope that the outcome of it isn't harm. We've been having a lot of conversations around that for some time because there are unintended consequences to everything. And I think that's something that we're trying really hard to be aware of. But communities have a right to make different rule changes, land use changes, zoning changes, if it's impacting how they live their lives. And I'm hoping that these tools will help empower communities to just understand what's happening.
So once a cleanup is complete, are they disappearing from that, or are you still leaving?
I think we still keep it up. I wonder if I can zoom in. I'll just, we'll show you different things like, you could see the dots cleanup complete. There's a cleanup in progress, cleanup is started, or awaiting cleanup. And so there's different ways that you can kind of see like the progress of different things. There's more information here as well. This isn't a tool that I use super often, so you'll see that I'm a little bit sloppier on this one. But this is just one public tool that I know exists where people can sort of look at, this is just for toxic cleanup, but this is one way of people understanding things that are happening in their neighborhood.
And Rob, you also asked a question about sourcing for the data. Right. So the health disparities map, there's actually also just a straight data portal through health that you can look at the same data, and when you go and pull up the same information on the map, it'll tell you where the data comes from, like if it's from the census or from other resources.
Are there any other thoughts or questions to share today?
Has this been socialized with local governments?
Not yet.
So
like we're trying, but that's the plan. That's the goal. Yeah. I'm adding it to the list right now.
This is Judy. So does that like tie in with what Michelle said earlier, you know, developing a toolkit to try and introduce people to them, help them become effective in those areas?
Exactly. A toolkit, guidance, this is how you might identify things, and really plain talking it as much as possible, because you shouldn't have to be an expert on this to understand how this impacts you. And so the goal is really for it to be a toolkit for anyone to use, especially in local government, and people can make decisions about how it impacts their community based off of the information that we can provide.
Is Oregon doing the same thing?
Ooh. They don't have an environmental justice law the way that we do, but they are standing up a map. They are standing up some processes. They just created their own environmental justice council, but they're kind of earlier in the process, and I'm a little bit jealous because they get to learn from our mistakes.
We have the benefit of being between California and Washington, so we
Right.
Well, I can think of the headwaters of the Columbia River in Canada has a lot of mercury pollution coming down from Canada and ending up in the bottom of Lake Roosevelt. So, you know, Canada is, you know, anyway, I just, yeah.
It's a great point. And I think also like tracking that will be part of this as well. I don't know necessarily that we will obviously have the authority to do anything about some things, but I think that starting with information and understanding it's a good place to start.
Very impressive. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm gonna check. Is there anyone with any questions left to share? Doesn't seem like it. Not on my end. And hey, Ryan, what would you see as the committee's next steps in advancing this discussion?
That's a great question. I think I'd also defer to the committee on how they wanted to proceed with any potential advice you guys want to work on. If you want to get any more background information on any topics, I think what might be a good idea, and I think we talked about this before, this is just my perspective, is as you heard from the state on the HEAL Act, it might be good to get another primer on the DOE's and EPA's initiatives. I know that we've done that a couple times before, But that was the last time, was a couple years ago. We have a lot of new HAB members, so similar to we gave an EJ briefing to the HAB at that same time a couple years ago, which is part of the reason why we brought Courtney on today. So that potentially could be something where maybe we, Lindsay could see if her staff or Dave and Roberto could see if they could bring some information on their EJ stuff. Or if you guys want to look at the draft or the provisional community engagement plan, there is like Courtney said, the final community engagement plan for ecology is not expected until 2025, so there's a bit of time there. But there are some other things you guys might consider looking at in the meanwhile to keep grinding the gears and just getting prepared, so to speak. So that's just some of my ideas. But Michelle, if you have any thoughts for the committee.
I think the full board should see it within at 2025 at some point.
I think the feds probably have matured their EJ strategies and guidance as well, since I think it was 2021 or something last time you heard.
Yeah, it was 2021 or 2022. It was
September of 2021 was the last one to the pick anyways.
Oh, the pick, yeah, and then the last, it was a committee of the whole. I think that was the fall of 2022 for the committee of the whole, I think.
I think it was May 2022.
May 17th, 2022, yeah, was the last briefing from headquarters.
It was cold.
Yeah, that's right, it was cold.
So I think that we have several elements at play. Of course, we can look at the interim communications plan now to at least know what's in it, so that when the update comes, we can understand how that's evolved from what was there originally. That'd be great information to share. Definitely hearing from the other two agencies to get a baseline of what they've got, and then really thinking about this as the Hanford specific advisory board. I mean, I recognize there's a lot of this that's interesting on a lot of levels, but really kind of understanding Ryan's ultimate direction for taking what will be ecology's full direction, and then kind of boiling that down to something really specific that's nuclear related, and how can this committee engage at that level. I know also thinking about our other federal partners with the DOE and EPA and the Justice 40 initiative, and I know there's also been some talk about, we can get an update right now, but it is the election year, and who knows what 25 will look like, but we can at least, again, status, where do things sit today? I think as we try to, as a committee, be aware of what all three agencies have going on, and how does that relate. I think the more information is better than less if we can schedule those kinds of updates going forward.
I have the request. Thank you.
It sounds like something we can probably follow up on the next planning call for the next committee. We'll see where we're at with the request and the other items then.
All right. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Great to meet y'all.
Okay. So, is there anything that needs to be said to conclude this item before we move on to committee business? All right. Well, I think with that, we can, if everyone's had a moment to think about it, what should the next steps be on committee elections?
Not everybody all at once.
So the initial part was a proposal to send out a query for nominations for the chair. The question remains is, would you like to hold elections for the vice chair today or at a different time?
Honestly, I would just as soon have the call for nominations include both positions, and have it be open to that wider group of people. We have a lot of new HAB committee members that are now kind of getting their feet underneath them a little bit, and there may be some interest, and especially in in a vice chair position of engaging with the committee and learning how the committee works. That's how I ended up in this seat for this committee this year. So I'd rather have that be an open opportunity. The only thing that I'm hanging up on is just that idea of, we know that committee leadership won't take over until October, but because the leadership workshop is so early in June compared to that, it would almost be easier if we were doing committee elections at our June meeting, because we were gonna do leadership workshop things in August or September in order for people to take off over in October. But I hate to have leadership miss out on participating in that workshop because we waited to do elections. So I'm not sure what other people's thoughts are about that.
One thing we've done in the past is invited nominees to the leadership workshop, even if they hadn't had the election yet. And that's something we could probably.
We can talk about that, yeah.
The leadership workshop isn't some exclusive event. But the reason it happens when it does is because then the full board considers the work plan and calendar in September, gets implemented October 1st. So that's the timing and why it happens that way.
And maybe it's like a further conversation at the leadership workshop in June. Is this still the right time to hold this workshop, given that the terms of those seats are moving? So do we want to push that back to August in FY25?
So, took a quick peek at the calendar. I think there's a reasoning for the way it's set up. In developing the draft work plan, the committees would meet in June. They would offer ideas of what they want their committee leadership to carry forward to that leadership workshop, also in June. They would develop the draft work plan in the leadership workshop, and that would go back to the committees in August, where the committees can kind of make any corrections, things that they didn't see that they wanted, or.
What else has to go to headquarters?
Yeah, that is true. It does need to go to headquarters.
And then it would go back to the full board in September for approval. So the meetings are sequenced such that it can follow its full development process.
Yeah, I think more than anything else, it's a 90-day window, so it can go to headquarters after June, so they can approve it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So for leadership elections, I heard we will put out the opportunity for committee members to self-nominate, and we're targeting June elections.
That would be my thought, but if anyone feels strongly otherwise.
And if the group decides they need a committee call to accomplish that, we can support that. What department can support that, Ryan? I don't want to speak for you or Dave.
Perfect, okay. I would support that.
So for the email that goes out, I think we should make it clear that we don't have nominations for chair, and we do have one nomination for vice chair. Because if we just put out, do you want to run for this committee? We need to make it clear that we don't have leadership for one of the positions at least. And Michelle, thank you for stepping up for vice chair. But it's good to encourage, if people do want to do vice chair, that would be the election. And then for June, I think we also want to include in that same email, if you do want to run, please save this date for the June leadership election or June leadership workshop. So that people are aware that they would need to take time to go to that and be in attendance.
Thank you. I'll craft something around that. So we have a path forward there. Our next step on committee business is to update action items.
If we can, I just brought up the calendar. And this will go to the next ESC call, but there was a proposal that for June, there was a proposal that the committee meetings moved so that Monday and Tuesday might be the committee meetings, and that the leadership workshop would then be on the 5th. Everything moved up one day, so that was one proposal. The other was swapping, but it seemed to make sense that the committees would meet before the leadership workshop. That's the current thinking. ESC will be discussing that. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. For action items that I recall, there was a request during the last COE meeting that our EM newsletters start showing up in App Happenings. I think everyone should have seen the first implementation of that as of last Thursday.
I noticed it. You're welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you for the request.
Baby steps, I love it. Thank you.
Did you have anything you need to cover during this section?
I sure don't.
We need to schedule an IM team meeting for the IM team of 3 parts.
Oh yes, I saw the note about the IM team for 3 parts, and I said, I don't know what that is. So
Last time we had the thing, which was what month?
January.
January. We started an IM team that's looking at doing sort of a book report on past advice that's related to outreach and engagement. And then bringing that back and seeing if anything needs refreshing. That's one of the parts. Another part was looking at a really short and sweet advice on best practices for agencies responding to public comment. When there's public comment periods that don't have required response. And then the third part was something.
The information sessions, the video.
Oh, yeah. So the idea was that we could write some advice asking the TPA agencies to come up with sort of brief web-based like 101s that they can put on YouTube and expand the public knowledge. So when we have new board members come in, we can send them to those videos on YouTube and say, hey, if you want to learn more about RECRA, here's a RECRA brief that's done specific to Hanford, not just a giant EPA one. So that was the 3 different pieces, and just to see if any of those 3 things had legs.
Clarification for myself on the IM teams. Am I recalling that it is not a best practice to have more than one IM team going at the same time?
No.
Or that's okay?
It's a workload issue. I mean, I'm sure Lindsay has to be at all the IM team meetings, so we tend to try to be respectful of that.
My thought process was that these 3 projects are not necessarily related in any way, and this committee can have more participation than a lot of the other committees, and it would seem to make sense that if we could get some volunteers for, maybe you call it a mini IM to be just doing the background work to then come together, you might have more willingness to participate in these things if we could break them off into 3 separate kind of actions.
Yeah, I think in January we consolidated because we didn't have a lot of different folks volunteering, so
Yeah.
we could easily split it apart.
So I guess, Lindsay, in terms of practicality, where if you are required to participate in every IM team, just kind of, I know it's semantics, but what does that mean? If we had volunteers that were going and doing some of this background work and bringing information together, and then there was a team meeting to discuss each of those, how does that need to look?
So it all depends on what the needs are of each issue manager team, right? And we have 4 subcommittees plus the ESC. And each of those committees like to have calls. Well, we have the calls, we have our committee meetings, we have briefings, we have a membership package, we have a work plan that needs to be developed. So there's only, 40 hours in my work week, technically. Typically, there's a lot more than that. However, I mean, I'll do the best I can to support, but I also think that we need to be realistic in the fact that this group is of volunteers. And so I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time. And also, if I'm spending all of my time on calls, it makes me less available to be working on things like briefings for the next meeting. So, I mean, it's all kind of a give and take. So the more IMT meetings we have, the less time I have to work on other things. But with that being said, if the group is developing advice, which is what the board is here to do, I'm here to support as needed.
And we've been trying to be respectful of time because these aren't necessarily the most pressing topics, but they are topics of interest still. And outreach and engagement is absolutely important. So, you know, it could be that maybe we put on the June agenda our book report and break that off and have a smaller group work on just looking back and seeing what Have Advice was. And that's not really something that necessarily needs an IM call. And it could just be an email exchange saying, here's the lists of advices, everybody read them and we'll see what's important.
And I do want to also mention, so in April on the work plan, we have time allotted for committees to meet that we're bringing advice forward to the May meeting. Now, with that being said, I believe we only have one committee bringing advice forward, and they are having a virtual meeting, the LIDS committee, depending on the time it takes for them to draft their traffic safety advice. There should be additional time for an issue manager team to work during those placeholder days. So there's no reason why, you know, the IM team of 3 parts couldn't have some time on one of those 2 days to get together and, you know, have a call to brainstorm, decide how they want to decipher it out. I mean, that's just an opportunity that's available if the group chooses to use it. So want to make sure I put that out there as well.
I think in addition to that too, as far as our actual committee meetings go, I mean, we have ample time in a half-day meeting to have some of this discussion as part of our meeting. And so, for example, you know, advice to the TPA agencies about the 101 videos. I think the first place we kind of have to start is, do we have an opinion on what we think is important enough that we would want them to produce that information on? Can we brainstorm that as part of a committee meeting first and before actually getting to the point of having the IM team? And the same with the best practices for responding for public comments, just kind of gather and brainstorm that information and then get the IM team to write it up.
And would it be beneficial for us to have a conversation about the YouTube recordings from HAB meetings that, you know, address things like RCRA and CIRCLA and the previous like 101s that have come forward? Are those sufficient? If not, what does that look like? I think maybe a robust conversation at the next COE meeting may be beneficial. Or as far as like response to public comments, what are the requirements that, you know, the department or ecology is or EPA are held to as far as responding to a public comment and go from there? I feel like there's a lot more information and I guess nuances that I think it might be important for folks to understand prior to asking for the group to write advice.
Well, and to be clear, IM teams do not always write advice.
Right, I'm just offering.
It's just a space to have that conversation that doesn't take up the entire committee time if the entire committee isn't interested in it. It's a fact-finding group.
Yeah, I think given that at least what I've seen in the last year, it's not like our COE committee is like a lot of the other committees that they have some really big burning issues and they've got to take all that time to have reports and information happen. If we've decided that these things are important and we can structure some of our information gathering and discussion around them to prime the pump to actually take an action, I would be very supportive of that.
I think that we could also do something like each of the subcommittees could have a reading list. And if one of us wants to highlight some things on the reading list that they included. And I'm thinking right now within the issues about the TBI coming up, there's a lot of literature on it that when we get our discussions on the TBI, we'll be prepared. And we wanted to worry about fresh new people as much because we have a reading list or a tank waste or, you know, I'm in that area. So, and there could be similar in health and safety, there could be, you know, in all the committees. I particularly have attention to anything tanks and that kind of thing, and that's what I'm reading. I'm, you know, digesting that and taking notes and highlighting things. And I'm sure that, I learned so much on the farm committee with the wastewater and the pump and treats and that I didn't get a chance to read. But if it's on a reading list, then it's something that I can either prepare for or look at or things of that sort.
And the other thought of the 101 sort of YouTube idea is that we've been recording these meetings now for the past 4 years or so. They never were recorded in the past, but now they are. We have full videos of all these briefings. So if there is a way for the TP agencies to, you know, snip the YouTube and republish it as a 101 on this topic, then someone doesn't have to look through the HAB agenda from 4 years ago, find the meeting, and then scroll through on 2.5 speed and hear people talking like gibwits.
And the videos could be on the reading list.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I did do one that, a couple of videos came out from, I can't remember the organization, but Let's Go Nuclear or something. And there were some very good discussions about the WTP and its activities. So the reading list doesn't necessarily mean government reports, but it could also include hot link to a video that's 5-10 minutes long or whatever. So, but we have to have somebody edit those or that. And
so the advice could be have the TP agencies develop a Hanford University YouTube page. And not necessarily tell them what needs to be on that page, but just make it and then talk to COE and say, hey, what are 101s that we'd be interested in? And then have someone look and say, hey, has there ever been a talk on it? And is the talk good audio quality and that type of thing? It would be a benefit to the public knowledge.
So I would say is a low-hanging fruit place to start, easy to have a couple of volunteers that wanted to go out and begin looking would be to start with the past advice. Yep. And just going through and identifying any of those past advice that had to do with outreach. Identify what they are so that we can ask members of the committee to review and see if there's anything that needs to update.
Make the reading list of past advice as opposed to a reading list of outside to start with.
Yeah. Yes, as a place to start. So is there anyone that would like to volunteer to take that trip down past advice memory lane and come up with that list?
I am going to take the same conversation to the next meeting, and I will volunteer to work on a reading list for the tanks.
Okay.
So, and that is
that all right?
That is.
I don't see why not.
That's included under the group of 3 parts as well, as right now. So I think that IM team has 3 people on it. So we already signed up to do that. We just haven't done it yet.
Okay. So there is an IM team and there are already volunteers.
Yes.
Do you just want to recap the 3 people I have right now?
It was Mia and me, and there was at least one other person.
Steve Anderson.
Steve Anderson, yeah.
Okay.
And I don't, my memory of January is not as good as it should be, so I don't remember if there was anyone else, but I know there were at least 3.
That's how I had it recorded, and the notes I had in front of me.
If April is too late, you know, maybe Josh and Judy can send something to the group and we can put something on the calendar.
I mean, as long as we can put a placeholder on the June meeting to have a report out, then April probably would work.
I don't want to lead it, but I certainly have a lot of stuff to.
Welcome to the IM team.
Yeah.
Okay, so the comments stepping back a bit. I heard, you know, the need to go through 5-hour meeting recordings. maybe a year ago, I learned how to tag things by chapter within these. So we do have timestamps where you can jump straight to a certain presentation and meeting. And if there was a desire to clip those out, I do still have all the source files and can do that relatively quickly. Is there anything else to say on this before we determine its path forward or clarify its path forward?
Are you volunteering for that?
If there was an instruction, we need this presentation clipped out from this meeting, yes, I can do that.
So for example, you know, if you look through some agendas and we're like, oh yeah, this presentation, you look back and we're suggesting it belongs on Hanford University, and if the agency said yes, if it needed to be clipped, then, you know, Josh could do that.
But we would start with the advice, advising the agencies to create a repository of 101s that are standalones. And then the agencies would then request the facilitation team if that was the way they wanted to do it.
Do we require a new repository, or is that simply just a new header on the public involvement existing webpage? 101, and that those videos just get
Maybe that's the way to do it. It seems like having a YouTube channel isn't a heavy lift.
You can make it on YouTube as well.
Right, so you can have a Hanford 101 playlist even and make it really easy for anyone to find it. Not without having to go to hanford.gov and then down 3 layers.
While I appreciate Josh's offer, I think we're putting the cart before the horse. We need to step back.
But knowing that the source data is there is good.
So the first step would be to offer some advice to DOE to generate a placeholder for this information.
To the TPA team maybe.
The first step is for the issue manager team to have their first meeting to determine what advice is necessary.
Whether advice is necessary.
Whether advice is
The first
necessary.
goal.
Yes, step 1.
Okay, and clarifying that step 1, when does the committee want that IM team to be scheduled, and what is its purpose?
Yeah, so we're gonna, I guess, try to get something scheduled for committee week in April. And we're going to be discussing what we want to report out in June and deciding which of the 3 parts warrant pursuing advice.
Going back to the calendar that theoretically is coming up. So for April, it was originally proposed that the 16th and 17th would be placeholders for committees developing advice for the May meeting. The 18th, that committee of the whole will focus on Rev 9 and be moved to this week down here. And then it was announced yesterday that the 16th is actually likely all hands Hanford employee meeting. Is that right, Lindsay?
Correct. It's not even likely it is.
So for the dates that were held, it might be that it's the 17th and 18th that would work for IM team. That might be a first place to look, so.
Correct, so the IM teams and any committees that are bringing advice forward to the May meeting, so that's those placeholders.
So it would be the 17th and 18th. Okay.
So that's when it would be.
So our IM team will schedule a call the 17th or the 18th of April with the intention of bringing a report back to the June committee meeting.
Yeah, a progress report, probably the book report on past advice would be ready for June. I doubt that if we are moving forward with any writing advice, I doubt those will be ready for June, but
sure.
Yeah.
And if the group needs something beforehand, just reach out to facilitation and we'll get something scheduled.
Excellent. And anyone else who wants to join the IM team, the more the merrier.
Maybe send out an email to request any volunteers. That'd be helpful.
I know we're trying to avoid sending out a lot of emails, but it might be worth.
Specific purpose emails are amazing.
Well, it might be worth sending out an email that says, here are the active IM teams. here's when there's scheduled IMT meetings, if you want to join, any of them, you know, because we don't need to be specific to one.
Right.
I was going to suggest that I've put out calls for volunteers on IMTs and had happens before, and that goes out tomorrow. To throw that in there.
So Lindsay, what's the difference between a planning call placeholder and a committee leadership call meeting placeholder?
What day are you looking at?
No, I'm just looking at the bottom list, and we have a planning call and a committee leadership call.
So planning call would be for the subcommittees, and the committee leadership call planning placeholder. The purpose of that was supposed to be for the ESC.
In previous versions of the calendar, it said EIC or ESC, and maybe in fiscal year 25, we could re-implement that to make it a little clearer.
So the greens are the finalized committee agendas, and the oranges are for the ESC to meet, or browns.
Right. They involve the same people, that's.
Right.
Essentially.
Subsets of the same people, yeah.
Right. So we're not eating up all your time.
Just all meetings.
I'm here anyways.
So to clarify, the IMT preference would for have happenings, announcements, specific email, or both?
Well, we're also sending out communication about elections, and so,
Right, that's a have live, right?
I would put IM teams and the have happenings and the elections in a standalone. That would be my preference.
I would support that.
And I was expecting the elections would be to the COE committee. Did I hear it's going to the whole HAB?
I believe that elections for the COE should go to the whole HAB, because technically every member of the HAB could be on the committee.
Right. So
Well, it would be primary
Yes, the
members,
primaries.
right, so all eligible, so those eligible to serve October 1st, all have members, primary have members, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other action items that the COE needs to cover?
I have one action item follow-up. There was a request at the January meeting to go over the survey results from the Hanford Dialogue event. I can share them real quick, and I've got them on a sheet. Josh is going to include them on the meeting minutes, I believe, but I was just going to share them just quickly. And there weren't a lot of responses to it, so it shouldn't take too long for us to go over it. So the December 2023 Hanford Dialogue event, we did the survey at the end and got 3 total responses. And again, this will be included in the meeting minutes. Let me actually go ahead and shrink this so you guys can see what here. So the first question we asked was, how did you hear about the event? And you can see the responses there. So this was multiple choice, choose all that apply. So that's why you see more than one answer. So it looks like it was largely, email, website, and stakeholder organization were all tied. And then with the following statements, select what you agree with most. The speakers were clear, coherent, easy. Quality of the sessions were good. Facilitation was good, and concluding session was satisfactory. For the most part, the results veered over on the agree and strongly agree side. You can see speakers were clear, coherent, easy to follow, were a little less so. Looking at the feedback we got from HAB members in December, which are also in meeting minutes from the December HAB meeting, as well as the meeting we had with you guys, as well as some survey responses. I think a part of that answer why this is lower is because it was a big room and we didn't have any partitions, and so I know we heard several comments that it was just hard to actually hear people talk. But of course, there could be other factors too. And then question about were reasonable accommodations available at the meeting. This one said no, and I think we have another question. Yeah, so if you answered no to question 3, what accommodation did you need? And the person that said no didn't respond to the follow-up. So we don't know what accommodation we wasn't available. But we did have the option to hear about what wasn't available. And then the free responses. We had 3 total free responses, I think. So we had one that talked about the dividing walls, and then this longer one, which I'm not sure if you want to go and read this whole thing right now, but it will be available again in the meeting minutes afterwards if you want to go and take a deeper dive. And so those are just 2 responses to the free response. So this will be included on the meeting minutes, as well as if folks are interested in getting the recap of all of the comments that were provided by HAB members at the December meeting. Josh, I believe the December minutes are they available now, or are they almost ready? So once those are available, you can review and actually go back and see all the comments HAB members gave on the Hanford Dialogue event. And then for the January COE meeting, once those minutes are finalized, you'll be able to go back and see those as well.
I would note that the draft version had gone out to the board for review, so they should still have that in their emails.
That's right, yes, so it should be in your emails for the draft at least.
Ryan, where did you say this is going to be available?
This is going to be, I provided a copy to Josh, and he's going to include it as like an appendices to this meeting's meeting minutes.
In this meeting, okay.
Yeah, that way it's formally included, and people can go back and see it whenever they want to.
Do we know why we only got a few responses there?
I think we talked a bit about it at the last meeting. I think there were a couple factors. One factor is we always just don't get a lot of responses to our meeting surveys. Another factor that we got some good feedback on was we only made this available through like a QR code and online. So I think if we go to the in-person meetings, if we provide like a written version of the survey, we could potentially get more responses. So that could be a couple things, but we're looking at trying to get more responses in the future. But also I know if you're at the end of a public meeting at the end of the night, the last thing you want to do is fill out a survey on your way out the doors.
Right.
So maybe it's something we send out a notice afterwards to yeah, go ahead.
And I'll just point out that industry standard for any survey, anywhere for anything, is like 10 to 30%. We had 50-ish people, so 3 is more than 10%, or less than, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just saying, surveys are really not.
Right.
Regardless.
The thing I'm most afraid of is that we've got the luxury of having the head of the project presenting at these meetings, at the Hanford discussions. And I don't want to get him or them disappointed and not show up. And because I thought that meeting was very valuable. I wish I would have told more people, about it, but next time I will. But I think Brian's presentation was great and I think it left a lot of people that, yeah, it's in good hands. Yep, it's in good hands.
Dan, online, did you have something to share?
Hi, thank you. I think I'm not a member of COE, but I have a question that came up from yesterday that's really perhaps a little bit of outreach and engagement. And we had a presentation yesterday afternoon on the K Basin's progress. And I found myself completely bewildered because I didn't know how much had been accomplished already at K Basins. And I'm wondering if you can direct me to a document that shows what has been accomplished in Hanford cleanup over the years. So, what I didn't know was that all the fuel had been removed from K East, put in K West, then removed to elsewhere in the sludge and all that. So I think we ought to celebrate the progress, the accomplishments that have already been made in Hanford cleanup, and in a way that you could easily find issues that, I'm sure there's many that have been totally taken care of, and we're done with that. So I would like to, I know we're always, our job is to give actionable advice to the United States Department of Energy. Okay, I get that. But I also think that our community relations might be helped if it were easy to figure out that we have accomplished stuff. And so I mean, I don't even know how to get this, but to have someplace where I could go and say, okay, 100K, what have we done? 100N, what have we done? What's left to do? In a simple way. So I think that that we should let the world know that, yeah, a lot has been done. Look at the cocooned reactors already. I mean, look at PFP or whatever. So is there a place that I can go look this up easily, or is this something that we might recommend be made available? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So Dan, if you look at the meeting chat, Patrick Conrad added cleanup numbers to date, a link for you to click on.
And we are always interested in hearing good news stories, as well as, you know, the challenges and room for improvement in briefings. So that, you know, maybe that could be a discussion of, you know, how do we get the message out that there is good work happening and people are doing good work every day, not just when there's something scary in the news. Shameless plug. The Oregon Department of Energy has periodically written a book called The Hanford Cleanup After Blank Years. So we did 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, and we're currently working on 35 years. So next year or two, there might be another one, and that just focuses on, it's going to focus on what progress has been made in the last 10 years. So I can bring some copies of those books if you want one.
They should be available at the facilitation office as well.
Okay.
Just looking at this, this graphic and thinking about Dave's question, I think the obvious piece that's missing to really understand that scope and scale is like, you know, 680 metric tons of contaminants removed from groundwater. You know, is there something that gives that scope? Like, that's probably not the best example, you know, something that 20 underground storage tanks retrieved, of how many are left, or, you know, so you really be like, oh man, you know, they're really making great progress.
Well, and the waste sites, like the 1,000 waste sites, there's a lot of waste sites out there, and some of them are really small, and some of them are, you know, acres. So that 1 acre waste site that's been cleaned up is extremely impressive that it's done, but, you know.
So quick food for thought. I know the cleanup priorities advice the board just passed actually had a advice point that touched on, it wasn't overall, it was like on a yearly basis. There was something to that effect in the advice, just for reference. And then there's been some resources being shared. So in addition to the DOE's ecology, we have a one-pager that we have some of this similar information, and we actually have the like a column that says like the challenge, and it has some of the original numbers, and then the results, which is where it's some of it's at today. Again, it's pretty high level, and it doesn't get into like the full detail of what you might be looking for, but just for awareness that also exists in addition to the resource DOE shared. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that. Just to remind that, I know that was an advice point and the cleanup priorities advice.
The college's got a great story map too.
Yeah, we have a story map.
And we have the fact sheets as well.
Yeah.
So.
And is this the one that if you hover over it, it's clickable to get more information on this, or is that a different?
I think you're thinking of a different one, but
okay.
I definitely would take a look at the current Hanford fact sheets.
Yeah, I recall it's been in the slide deck from a previous full board meeting, so.
And this changes, so
okay.
This is the current version, but that will change as progress continues.
The recollection is that during those cleanup priorities, there was a request for something like a dashboard, and whether it's for 1 year or multiple years or percent complete, that type of report back to report on accomplishments, that you'd be able to look at it at a glance and make it easier for like local jurisdictions, local organizations to understand.
I also, in addition, is there some place that you can go and there's really two topics here. Find out how much it costs, and I would like to see that in contemporary dollars and inflationally adjusted. And the second item is what difference has the HAB ever made? Where did we actually give actionable advice to DOE that they took and it made a big difference? Again, I don't know if that's in our mission, but I would like to know, and I'm quite sure that the HAB has made a positive difference, no doubt about that. But is there some place you could go find those too? Thank
Okay, we've got that down. Unless somebody knows of an existing resource, is there anything existing that would?
The response to the
Yeah.
HAB advice.
Reading through every response to advice.
Yeah, I would recommend Dan looking at the Hanford Advisory Board advice as well as the agency response.
Yeah, I don't think there's a collective summary of that kind of a thing, but the advice response individually is on there, but there's no collective everything, like summary kind of a thing, but the advice response all individually is on there, but maybe that's something that could be looked into.
I think probably the most important thing, Dan, is the fact that we have cemented our values, have flowcharts where we expect activities that are being followed. So I think that's real important, and our values, I think we concentrate less on the values we've already done, we've already talked about, but yeah, I think big change. Remove, treat, and dispose is the biggest. Another progress is the plug and play. I don't know if people have seen those data sheets where it used to be you had to do a separate engineering study on every waste site you had. And they're finding hundreds of small little waste sites. It's maybe a building here or a building there that without having to do all these, if it meets the criteria, they can just clean it up and get it over to Earth. So, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff. Millions of dollars have been saved because of those. And, you know, I'm a real fan of the plug and play.
So, note that we're looking at about 10 minutes to wrap up. The LIDS committee met yesterday and they had a concern that they wanted to pass on to the COE. They heard a presentation at a previous board or committee of the whole, I don't recall, on the Hanford Worker Engagement Center. And the concern was that not enough people who would want to utilize those resources knew about it. Rob had a very good example. And they thought to pass that on to the COE as something you may want to consider. Rob, can you tell us a little bit more about the concern you had?
Sure. After the presentation that we did have, I kept two of the handouts, and I have a couple of friends that are old-time Hanford workers, and some of them are suffering. One vapors, another one is some muscular thing from hauling stuff around, but they had never heard about the engagement center, and they've been struggling. And when we got our presentation, it was a very open presentation. I don't exactly know what their resources are, other than they seem to have a lot. And, you know, ex-workers never knew about it. You know, I'm aware of an organization called the Patriot Hanford Workers or something. Does it, people remember the name there? The Patriot, anyway, there's an organization that maybe should be brought into this. Patriot Warriors, something? Does anybody get those emails from time to time? No? Okay, anyway, my only point is that for a couple people that seem to be up on the news, just didn't know about it. And because the Tri-City Herald is really not a big paper anymore around here, and you gotta click on the computer, and for a guy that's 78 years old, who is having problems breathing, he's not spending a lot of time in the computer, but looking for things. And I don't know how to reach them other than by word of mouth, but I just think it's an underused, you know. And my plea is that, you know, maybe this committee could champion some sort of an awareness for the Hanford Engagement Center that would be more viewed by the public. And I don't know how.
Rob, my question would be, and I'm still getting my mind around this as a new kid, but as the COE committee of the HAB, is it our committee's responsibility to ensure that public awareness happens, meaning being the purveyor of the public information? Or is it our role to ensure that advice gets given to our, the TPA agencies or others who might have a responsibility to do that, to say the community needs this information, go forth and make it so? What's our, that's what I'm asking, is the HAB's responsibility to, it goes back to the budget question that we discussed multiple times. Is it our job to have a budget to ensure that public awareness happens? Or is it our job to identify places where awareness is lacking?
Or is it the department's responsibility to bring the folks back in the room to have that conversation so that questions are answered and shared on what it is that they're doing to advertise the service? Now, I believe this was briefly touched on at the December board meeting with Heather Goldie, but if there's additional questions that came out of it, which there appears to be, maybe we have her come back at the subcommittee level and have another briefing or a discussion, just a Q&A. There is an opportunity there as well. Look like Tom had something to add.
The COE's job is to have the conversation. And then it is all of our responsibilities as representing interests to bring that conversation to our interests.
Right.
So Rob brought it to his friends. You know, that's what we should be doing.
Right.
If there's a gap in communication that we see, though, that's when we would say to the TPA agencies, there seems to be a gap in communication. Maybe you want to fix that.
And like Rob, Dan said, is Cold War patriots. So
Cold War.
in having this conversation, you know, people are sharing information, and then Rob or HWEC could maybe see if that's something they need to follow up on.
You know, now that you're mentioning that, I was just thinking yesterday it was a perfect opportunity to talk to Becky, and maybe Hamtech can also play a big role in this, because they, the workers, the people who do the job are all Hamtech employees, or members rather, and that might not be a bad approach. Have we ever had a Hamtech come to our meetings? They are what they are. Everybody knows who they are, right?
Rebecca serves as their representative.
Right.
Looks like Liz put something in the chat.
Yeah.
That may be beneficial for the group to read.
Agreed. Liz's chat comment says, may be helpful for the clarity of the work of the board is to give advice to the TPA agencies. The work of the board members is to take information they learn as a board member and share it with their community servers.
Thank you, Liz. So that was a request that we made of the ESC, the department did this week on the call, is we're asking at the May meeting for members to share how they are communicating with their constituencies, the information that's received at the board meetings and at these subcommittee meetings. And so that's a request that's coming forward that you'll see in the May meeting agenda.
So in our remaining 5 minutes, we can determine what, if anything, this committee wants to do with that request from Liz. And also think about what this committee wants to see occur on this June agenda. I do know we have one small time slot held for the results of the 3-part IM team.
And elections.
And elections.
And the draft and work plan elements.
And Brian, you said that would be a good time for you to present the results of the survey?
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, so maybe if you guys are interested, you can slot that in there as a potential one, but I defer to the committee if you guys want to hear that.
So TPA updates, engagement calendar, learning stuff, IM team, work plan, elections. It's a pretty full day. Happening.
And a small note, there was a request at the January COE meeting to start looking for times to slot in, I think what was called an engagement roundtable, the rebranding of the ad member self-assessments.
Which is similar to what Lindsay was just talking about doing at the board meeting level, which is, how are you communicating information back to your respective agencies?
So, of those options, what are your priorities for June?
It didn't sound like many of those, with the exception of Ryan's update, were not a priority. They were somewhat timely and necessary conversations.
We should look at the work plan and see what we had already discussed for COE.
It's no concept.
EJ was a big one, because this communication
is
is
my
still
work
standard, and there's Rev 9A, I believe.
Right, which Rev 9A, we're still waiting for more information before we can have that conversation.
Yeah, for the committee of the whole, we've come to the PIC/COE 2 times now to talk about public involvement specific to Rev 9. We might have more to share. Depending if other topics fall through, that's something I can always easily provide an update on. So that could be like a backup topic, maybe, if you guys, if the other topics that you want don't work out. Or it could be a primary one if you want to be a primary one.
And the risk communication one, I've been thinking about it with Carm because it's a joint topic. And it might be worth doing sort of a panel discussion as opposed to a traditional PowerPoint. Because risk means a lot of different things to different people, and having some risk experts from DOE and Department of Health and Ecology come and just talk amongst themselves with some prompts from the committees might be able to get some more, distill some more information so as we can have a high level discussion as opposed to getting into the risky weeds, which are pretty risky.
And I'm still hunting that one down, so
Yeah. So that
timing
one,
is TBD.
not June.
Probably not June, but.
So in looking at the topics for COE, we had the increasing HAB member and public participation, which that's part of what our IM team activities are working on. The new member orientation discussion, which really happened in January. The environmental justice communications, which we have started and will have ongoing. The review of the 20 coming. No, we did 22.
23.
We'll get ahead of the game and get 23. Milestone updates, which I think are coming through multiple channels at this point. And then the risk communications and strategies, which is TBD. So as far as our work plan goes, we're tracking right along. So for June, is there, you asked about prioritization. I think obviously elections need to happen. The report from the IM team, depending on whatever they have available to report back, is, we'll hear what they have at that point. What else did I miss for January?
Discussing the work plan.
Oh, yes, discussing the work plan.
And then looking at the calendar, in conclusion for this fiscal year, work year, August is the concluding committee week for this cycle of the work plan. So maybe risk would be possible then, and it sounds like almost everything else has been touched on for the current work plan.
Well, and it's not unusual for a topic to continue on to FY25. So just because we addressed it in FY24 doesn't mean it's not going to be addressed again in FY25.
Right.
And if we don't get to it, it will be carried over. So
Risk isn't going away.
Yeah.
that is very true.
The only topic we had that we had specifically said might generate advice or requested advice was related to the EJ topics. And then of course, we're already with our IM team talking about potential other advice. So. Okay, so do you have a comment?
I hope so. I'm sure we'll be talking more about the agenda as we get closer to June. Is there anything that needs to be said to conclude our committee business?
Final remarks, Michelle?
Just thank you all for your patience as I
step in at the last minute to run our meeting today. And we'll see you all at our next committee meeting.
I appreciate everyone's participation. This meeting's adjourned.